My name's Jim Mallinson. I'm a scholar of Sanskrit and yoga's history. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the practice of yoga fits into the context of Tantra, how the two histories are kind of intertwined and they diverge and come together. Helping us out here today, we've got Ruth Westoby and Zeena Kalisperides, who are both expert yoga practitioners. What they're doing is going to be to show how the postures I'm talking about can be manifested. I'm just coming to the end of a 5-year project on the history of physical yoga practice based at SOAS here in London. So we've made a lot of discoveries, and a lot of it concerns the relationship between physical yoga practice and Tantra. Yoga's come a long way from how we understand it in its earliest sources that we have from India. So the yoga that you see practiced, or you may practice yourself down the gym, has evolved considerably from that time. In fact, it's evolved a lot just over the last 150 years. Through looking at art historical materials and manuscripts and reports from outsiders coming into India, we can kind of piece together a picture of how yoga's evolved over the last 2,500 years. And a really important part of that story is how Tantra affected yoga. Tantra is not as old as yoga itself. Tantra first appears around the 4th or 5th century AD, and yoga had already been around for 1,000 years. But up to that point, it had really been the preserve of mainly male, and some female practitioners, but male ascetics who had renounced normal life, who lived outside of society and had dedicated themselves to achieving enlightenment, so liberation, freedom from the constant torment of being forever reborn into this world of suffering. It's quite a negative worldview. But then Tantra comes along, and not just with yoga, with its ritual practice more broadly understood, it kind of puts a more positive spin on things. Prior to about 1000 AD, all the postures we hear about in any text on yoga, tantric or otherwise, are seated postures for meditation. So, the earliest yoga texts, they associate yoga very closely with meditation and breath control. Those are the techniques that you use to get enlightenment. And in order to do those, you need to sit in a solid, steady, seated position. Tantric texts do elaborate further on these postures, and you would get lists of 30 or 40 in some texts. But again, they're all still there. They're seated postures. They're not the dynamic, more gymnastic or contortionist postures that you might associate yoga with today. The most famous of which being probably the Lotus position, Padmāsana in Sanskrit. This image of the yogic body, this wonderful image, comes from a manuscript which is now in the British Library, probably the finest illustrated manuscript of yoga postures and yoga-related ideas in the world, I think we might be able to say. And this image portrays the yogic body. And what we find with tantric images of the body is that the whole cosmos is in the body. So along the central channel, the elements of the cosmos are aligned in an increasingly more subtle series. So you start by meditating on the points at the bottom of that central column, that central channel, and you slowly move upwards. And that is the process in your mind of reabsorbing the cosmos. There's an early corpus of tantric texts going from the 4th or 5th century up to about the 10th century. And then at that point, we see these new methods of yoga appearing, which have physical methods, more physical methods. A key point of difference, again, that we see appearing at this moment 1,000 years ago. So Tantra's well established by then. We have this idea of the yogic body. But the very first text, a text called the Amrita-siddhi, which we've been working on at SOAS over the last 5 years, it says very specifically that everything that you find in the cosmos is located within the body, okay? But there are special substances within the body that are not found elsewhere in the cosmos. So it's only by manipulating these vital energies within the body that you can become enlightened. So this new movement comes along in which you kind of individualize the practices that are taught in Tantra. Okay, so you can do all the stuff of Tantra within your own body on your own. And the techniques used for that also become much more physical. Different, more complicated balancing postures start to appear, postures that cannot be held indefinitely in particular. And probably the very first one we have any record of is what's called the Peacock pose, Mayūrāsana, okay, where the body should be extended like a stick, parallel to the ground. And then pretty soon after that, we get what's called the cock pose or the rooster pose, Kukkuṭāsana, which is the lotus position, but then you stick your hands through between your lower leg and the thighs and lift yourself up off the ground. So these are postures that you're hard pushed to hold for more than a few minutes. So something's going on here, something's changing. What we find from the 16th century onwards is a big proliferation in descriptions of asana practice in text. And there's a text in the 15th century called the Hatha Pradipika, which means the light on Hatha Yoga. That teaches 15 postures, and 7 of those are kind of these non-seated, more complicated positions. So we find things that, when they first appear in texts, were not taught even as yogic postures. So a nice example of that is Śavāsana, or the corpse pose, which is basically just lying on the ground like a corpse. And the earliest treatments of it as a yoga posture do say, yes, it's for removing tiredness and so forth. But prior to that, it was taught, it wasn't a posture, it wasn't an asana, it was a specific method of meditation, it's grouped with various different esoteric techniques for attaining samadhi, the ultimate goal of yogic meditation. Probably the next one we find is the headstand. We get kind of travelers' reports and textual references and sculptures from about the 12th or 13th century onwards of headstands. The headstand's quite interesting because it's quite closely associated with yoga practice today. It's seen as an iconic yoga asana, but it doesn't appear as a yoga asana until really quite late in the text, 17th, 18th century. It does appear as a method of austerity, what they call tapas in Sanskrit. So, doing one of these really hardcore things like standing up for years on end or holding one or both arms up in the air for years on end. It's kind of grouped with those methods. We also find within these Hatha Yoga texts the idea that if you invert yourself, that is a way of manipulating the vital energies within the body, the ones that are normally all flowing downwards and out, that you want to keep them. You want to keep them in the head, ideally. So if you stand on your head, you can use gravity to bring that about. When that's introduced, it's classified as a mudra, one of these seals, one of these techniques for manipulating the vital energies. But later on, in this Yoga Pradipika text, it's classified as an asana. So the name when it's one of the esoteric techniques is viparita karani, which means the inverter or the reverser, that which reverses the flow of what's going on in the body. And then it gets taught in this text as the viparita mudra. It looks kind of like a shoulder stand, really. Normally in the text, the position is not really specified. It just can be any way that you turn your body upside down. Because even though these texts become very keen on teaching lots of postures, the postures are always very much preliminary. They're kind of to make the body strong and lean and ready for long periods of meditation and breath control. This new movement of physical practice arrives about 1,000 years ago and takes on the ideologies behind Tantra, but provides new methods of achieving its ends.